Okay, this is great. I'm delighted to have Peter Ryan here, head of Ryan Research. Peter has spent a lot of time in Ireland where he studied and lived for a few years, but now he lives in Phoenix, Arizona, which is obviously the new, ground zero, I suppose, for the American semiconductor industry. And the reason I want to talk to Peter is because he's is a political commentator on both Irish politics and American politics. And this is just, a very critical, crucial time for Irish American relations going into a new Trump administration. And the current Irish government obviously don't have particularly good understanding or natural, congruence with the Trump's team. So it's important that we get a sense of what the sentiment is in America from American political commentators, and Peter is uniquely positioned because he has a foot in both camps. So thanks, Peter. I know you were in Ireland recently at Kilkenomics, so you're definitely keeping your eye in.
Yeah. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on. It's been very fascinating to watch the developments unfold between the political events in Ireland and the obvious Trump resurgence and winning his election. And I think what's even more interesting is how prominent Ireland has become as at least a rhetorical device within the Trump camp, in that Ireland's representing this type of foreign country that's getting one over on America, and America needs to do something about that. And now we can get into the specifics of that, but yeah, there really will be a significant, I think, dispute as Trump gets into office, and it's going to be something to navigate for Ireland, and it might present a lot of challenges, but also opportunity. And this is something that I have actually been warning about with some of the more longer term subtle hints that have been coming down the pike. So I'm here to talk about those challenges and talk about what opportunities Ireland has.
Would you have been a Trump supporter?
So I kind of grew up within like a conservative family who is aligned that way. I was previously, much more libertarian, much more ensconced in that sort of tech libertarian world of Silicon Valley. But since then, I've come a lot more to more of a sort of a nationalist populist understanding of politics, and how that one informed my economics, which is my main um, hobby horse, and how those economics then inform my politics. So then within sort of the era of 2016 forward, I think I was aligned with that Trump movement, especially uh, the sort of universal populism of it, because it's not just Trump, it's the UK, it's Europe. If you actually see the Financial Times, I believe, just published today,
No.
a cool infographic of showing the gains that right-wing parties had in Europe versus the losses of left-wing parties. And so, without a doubt, 2016 forward has been the era of nationalist populist reaction. And that's happening for very specific reasons. Most obviously, uncontrolled mass migration, less obviously, sort of these longer term economic trends of sort of deindustrializing, of sort of financializing your economy, of kind of allowing your population to kind of decline into squalor. And so these are things that are all fueling this. And so I very much am attracted to those impulses that are fueling this universal drive towards that. And Trump, for an American, was obviously that vehicle. Now there were things, especially that Trump did, I totally agree with. The demand for tariffs, the demand to think about industrial policy, to bring factories back to America, and a more intellectual articulation of that Trump philosophy is from a guy like Robert Lighthizer, who's been a trade representative in American politics since Ronald Reagan. And one of his big accomplishments was working on projects like the Plaza Accord, where they were dealing with the rise of Japan in the 80s. So this is a idea with intellectual backing to it and historical merit, whether it be with real guys in the trenches that also produce academic work like Lighthizer, or the historical tradition, of how America kind of developed through different eras of its history. So yes, so I would say 2016, part of that universal populism. But I'm actually going to come out with a little bit of an essay that might be a bit of a critique, as I've been kind of coming around more to that pattern, where the 2024 Trump campaign seems to have tilted a lot towards this libertarian stuff that comes out of Silicon Valley. And I find a lot of that anathema to what the 2016 was and that general sort of populist movement that it goes across the West. And so a lot of that Silicon Valley libertarian stuff, as much of it, some of it's new, some of it's kind of weird. Much of it is not in fundamental disagreement with the status quo that has been governing our societies. And I think that's probably the most important aspect of this, that whatever we want to pick off here and there, if you're a nationalist populist, part of this movement across the West, you actually do have a fundamental disagreement with how it's been governed for the past like 3 decades. So that's kind of where I stand now.
And so would you have been surprised with the amount of support, or how quickly the support has come from the heavy hitters in Silicon Valley, from big tech or little tech, how much they've gotten behind the Trump campaign? And do you see that they could be a bit of a Trojan horse in a way, or have led to false promises, being this H-1B controversy that's erupted over the last year, or the last week?
Yeah, so that's where I think a lot of the fervor of this H-1B debate occurring on Twitter and wherever else it spills out into is from this fissure within the Trump movement, where it is this, like I've described, it's sort of the 2016 doctrine and how that is part and parcel to that universal across the West wide conception of nationalist populism. And so to simplify things as much as we can, Trump was the build the wall guy. I mean, anti-immigration was a huge aspect of why this man was elected, why he beat all the odds, and why there's significant populist base of support for him. And so now when these Silicon Valley guys, many of which started supporting Trump 2 minutes ago, and we're calling him all the names in the book and supporting his opponents in the prior campaigns, now they want to come out as the biggest Trump supporters and start rewriting what the sort of tenets of his policy goals are. And so for the MAGA people, it is a little bit frustrating to see these guys then sort of get positions of prominence, and then knowing full well that they have a fundamental disagreement with the core fundamental question of immigration. And it's not just the illegal immigration, even though in terms of quantity, in terms of issues of crime and other things like that, that is a significant issue. That is why it was emphasized for most of the past decade with Trump. But at the same time, Trump in 2016 was quoted as being against this type of high-skilled substitution of mid to, high-ish workers in America. And so Trump was against it. The different influencers around MAGA were against it, such as, Steve Bannon and so forth. And he's been sort of fighting that crusade and explaining that. And so when these Silicon Valley types come in and start saying how, oh, no, we'll kind of deal with the illegal immigration, wink, wink. But, we got to allow the high skill immigration, legal migration. And so people see, one, we already know, like the H-1Bs is pretty much a scam. And about 50% of the H-1Bs are just outright abuse and scam in the system.
Do you think,
do
you think if, like you saw, it was all, complete bag of cats on X for the last few weeks, and then Musk comes out and says, yeah, the H-1B system is, completely fraudulent, but we're going to reform it. And then you're like, well, why didn't he say that at the start?
Yeah.
Because I think everyone agrees that there's a need, space for a very efficient type of system where you do bring in really top talented people, and it's about getting that balance right. And I don't think that was communicated at the start. It's like, yeah, if they just admitted the system was wrong. But one thing I saw, I don't know if you follow Eric Weinstein closely, but
Mhm.
he brought out, and he's a Democrat on left, and he brought out, well, hey, wait a second, everyone, look at the genesis of where this program came from, and it was basically, in his words, back in the 70s or 80s, it was a program to limit the salaries of professors in universities, and that they would bring in foreign professors and keep the salaries low. And he's like, yeah, this is a scheme to keep salaries down. So if that's the genesis of it, I think it would be very hard to undo that. But at the same time, I'm caught in both fields, because I'm like, abuse of this system is really wrong, but the system itself needs to exist in some format.
Yeah, so I think that's sort of the tricky part here is where like in America we have like the O1 version that's a higher level of H1B, and that brings in, significantly less, but it has higher qualification standards. So the issue is like no one's taught like, and this is where it kind of gets muddied in the waters because after all this vitriol and back and forth, some of the pro H1B side is talking about reforms now. But you have to ask the question, like, why do you guys like pick the fight over H1B? Like, why? Like, if you are for truly the exceptional, talented people, like we have the O1, we can talk about the O1, and we can even keep some of the H1Bs, but like you have to get on board with the idea that 50% of it has, just right off the bat, that's gone.
Hmm.
So the 85K, which it's actually more with exemptions and things like that, but using the 85K cap per year for H1Bs, you're cutting that in half. Um, so I think though when we get into the sort of back and forth of now the Elons are talking about reform and things like that, and I think you're certainly right. There's aspects where the system itself, it has to be more efficient, it has to be optimized. Um, I think there's a fundamental issue of trust that's also at the heart of this. Like, I think the MAGA people, or just the people that are even on the left that are addressing this issue, um, the issue is that we don't trust you guys on your word. You're going to say one thing to us and do another. And like what everyone is acknowledging as well is that Canada is currently in the unstable high immigration system that it is in, specifically under the guise of legal high skilled migration, to the degree to which the left wing woke Justin Trudeau has come out in full force to end that paradigm of Canadian immigration. And
Hmm.
so right now, Justin Trudeau is to the right of Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, and so forth. So we're in a very peculiar
But
world where that's the case.
the funny part about this is, so from my point of view, right, I run a small business
Sure.
in Dublin. We employ 10 people. Half the people, just over half, are from Brazil or South Africa, mostly Brazil, and they're all here on work permits. Now, when I started this just directly after COVID, I found it very difficult to hire anybody, and now I find it very easy to hire people because we have there's a lot of workers here, and this is not high skilled work whatsoever. So with my employer hat on, I'm like, well, this is great. I can get people to work anytime I want, and if anyone is there's no going to be no demand on wages going up, because I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure I can find someone else. Um, but my issue here is that means it's a right-leaning policy. So like, if you're on the left, you should be against this. There's two ways of looking at it.
Yeah.
you can look at it from like, so if we're bringing the same amount of people from a load of different countries, so if we're bringing the same amount of Indians, same amount of Brazilians, same amount of Chinese, whatever, that's fine. But the other issue here is that we're actually bringing, 5 times more Indians than we are Chinese. So it becomes a cultural thing when you bring too many from one country. But leaving a country aside, it's actually if you're a trade unionist guy, socialist guy, you should be completely against this. So that's why I'm like, why aren't in Ireland people before profit coming out and saying no? But they obviously just don't realize.
Yeah, well, that's certainly a distinction between what we can call the old school left and the new
Yeah,
school. And the old school looked at it from purely an economic lens, and they just said, if you do not have protections around your domestic labor and you bring in scab labor from other countries that have different cultural values on, labor conditions and what they're willing to tolerate in living conditions, they will always undercut your native workforce. And so in order to protect employment of our native workforce and the wages commensurate with our national standard of welfare, we have to limit immigration. And that's where people always like toss over some Bernie Sanders clips from a long time ago where he talks like that.
yeah,
But like kind of since I would call it like the financial crisis, we've kind of had that woke revolution within the left where all the left is now is kind of a cultural distillation of grievance politics
yeah,
uh, and uh, and all this stuff that can be low-hanging fruit to criticize of them. And that economic angle has been lost, but that economic angle has also been, in a way, been picked up by the revolution within the right, where the right is rejecting, like I said, that old school style of like neoliberalism from the right, libertarianism from the right in the advent of Trump's demanding tariffs, Trump's demanding immigration restriction, all this type of stuff. So, that is sort of the new milieu where you basic as I actually someone else made this distinction. I forget who. It may have been Russell Napier, but he described it. What we have today is corporate socialism versus national capitalism. And
yeah,
so I view myself on that side of national capitalism, which has like kind of moved around some of the different dots.
yeah. Um, there's another aspect to this from an Irish point of view, in that from an Irish point of view, there is actually very little difference of being here on a work permit and being here as an asylum seeker. Um, Technically, now there is they come from different backgrounds, but after 4 months, if you're here as an asylum seeker, you have a right to work. And if you're staying in an asylum center and you get a job, you can even set up a company and you can go. And then if you make enough money, you're here, and then you can just continue on. And so in a way, there is no difference. Where whoever comes here has a right to work. But is that the case in America, or do people just work illegally?
Well, there's certainly different spheres. I mean, at the end of the day, as well, like one of the reasons that you might define a left-wing economic value being inserted into this Trump right-wing national populist wing um, is because the policy of the Republican Party for decades has been totally on board with importing illegal immigration to work the low wage agricultural and menial factory jobs like chicken plants in Georgia or something like that. Um, like it's not that this happens behind the back of those who govern us. It has
Yeah.
been a well planned and accepted fact of life in America that we act. It's not that we can't stop illegal immigration, is that we enjoy it because it brings us an exploitable class of undocumented immigrants that are able to be abused in working conditions and paid wages we would never think of paying our native population. that have citizenship and all the rights that are afforded to it. So, that that is what goes on in America, and those people, can live a lot of their whole lives in undocumented status, and it's more so their children that are born within the United States actually then become the citizen. That's kind of the trade they're doing.
Yeah.
They could go on to work in the normal economy.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's kind of your corporate socialism that
yeah,
so let's just change it up here for a second. So,
sure.
obviously the big talking point, I think, in every podcast that I'm listening to is DOGE, Elon, and Vivek. And I don't think people have an appreciation for in Ireland about what they're actually planning to do. Unless you're listening to two American podcasts all day, you wouldn't hear it. So you probably hear it all the time. But is what they're going to do too ambitious? Will they succeed? What is the perception on the ground at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think their top line figure was something like 2 trillion that they
Yeah,
want to cut, which, like, to anyone that's ever like had to dabble in the world of government spreadsheets and analyzing like the budget and things like that, like, I mean, that's pretty unachievable for all of the commitments that we have and obligations that we have. Now they could do very extreme things that will go beyond the pale of what people normally do. Some of the things they called out, I believe they had like a 500 billion sort of quick list of things that they could try to reform or cut. I believe like some of the biggest items on that list were things like veterans healthcare and like funding to NASA. Um, so so it kind of gets to the point where like who knows what else they have in the 2 trillion list, but it starts getting to the point of like one, I don't think we should start cutting things like we have a soldier that dedicates his life to the country, he gets his leg blown off, and then we're going to stiff him on the bill. I don't think that's where you go with efficiency. And then, in the whole guise of let's maximize our technology output and like go to Mars. I don't think we should be cutting NASA either. Uh, and there's just other things about that they would cut that I don't think it would be surgical or methodical in any way. Like Vivek's talked about how he wants to fire employees by like who has an even or odd social security number. Um, and so this is where like I have my own share of criticisms, and how I always like to frame this is the answer to what we might call an obese government, which is bloated and inefficient and all these things. I don't believe is like an anorexic government, which just
yeah,
then gets starved and whittled down. My solution is you create an athletic fit government, which cuts the bloat but stays muscular and strong in the correct areas. And so that's where I think the government should go. That has a lot of probably disagreements with DOGE because they're more of the anorexic angle. And again, I have problems with them thinking in regards to like we're going to cut veterans healthcare or what has been the long time Republican desire in terms of cuts is that we are going to then cut things like Social Security and
mm,
things people have paid in all their lives, and now you're telling them, they're not going to get it. But we're not going to touch other pet projects that people might have government contracts in order for their free market startup to, still exist. So that's where I have a lot of problems. And just to cap this off, the H-1B debate has been actually a very illuminating connection to DOGE because like in the sort of sphere of bringing in foreigners to undercut wages in America, but it's also sort of in a circular connection to the wave of American corporations outsourcing jobs to India to create more efficiency. And so you almost have to start looking at this a little bit like, is part of DOGE a desire to cut American labor that is in these government programs or in the private businesses that contract with the government in America and farm those out to undercutting Indian firms that are either in America doing abuse of the immigration system, or they're actually back in India. And so that's where it gets into a conversation. Are we really being efficient, or are we actually just like providing a special interest with pork from the government system?
Yeah, and in the need to like cut things and make money, what about the threats of bringing back big tech, who are mostly in Ireland, to the US? Do you think that is likely to happen? I feel like I'm telling ghost stories sometimes at the moment, posting about Howard Lutnick and things like that. Like there's genuinely a sense of fear in Ireland at the moment in as to what's coming, because we all know how highly concentrated and levered we are, on just maybe three or four companies, never mind 10. And if anything was to happen there, it could be detrimental. And then, so this is where we get to, the crux of things. Like we currently have a government, a Taoiseach that is called, Trump an awful gowl. We have terrible relations with Israel. They've just pulled out their embassy here. Not only that, but the week that they pulled out their embassy, our president insulted them, and accused them of setting up compounds in Egypt. Simon Harris has had conversations with Mahmoud Abbas, and said, Ireland has unwavering support for him, and he's a controversial figure. So where does all that, when you throw all of that up in the air, where does it land? Is there going to be more venom behind an American attempt to bankrupt Ireland?
Yeah, so the American hostility towards Ireland has three faces to it. The longer term, boring, bureaucratic realization, whether in America or how America relates to the rest of Europe, the OECD change, the leveling of tax rates, that has started before any of that other stuff, and before Trump was thought to have even a chance of coming back. So that has been the slow march of correcting the arbitrage game that Ireland plays, that is coming no matter what. Now, when Trump comes back into the system, like I said, the intellectual articulation of what Trump gets at is from guys like Robert Lighthizer, and in his book, he calls Ireland out specifically. Now, he actually talks about the pharma sector mostly, and saying, because pharma is, obviously very big in Ireland, and he's saying, one, why can't that money be back in America? Two, why can't those jobs be back in America? Those are pharmaceutical factory jobs. And so he was very critical on that. And then, of course, lumping in the tech sector to that. So he has been writing about this in places like his book and other places for quite a while, and wanting to correct the issue from that for economic fairness perspective of using protectionism. And then with the advent of some of this newer stuff, when it comes to Israel, certainly that might make people like Lutnick a little bit more aggressive in wanting to challenge some of that. And you've seen a lot more, almost like using some of the Lighthizer rhetoric, but like in a battering ram way in terms of Ireland's diplomatic efforts vis-a-vis Palestine and Israel. So those are the three faces. You have just like boring bureaucrat gang that is trying to stop the arbitrage, because in a way, like it had to stop at some point.
Yeah.
And then you have the Trump intellectual sort of protectionism of it. And then you have this reactionary, tit for tat that people want to do because of a totally separate foreign policy issue.
Just a question there. Robert Lighthizer, so what's his current position to Trump?
Yeah. Well, it's been kind of talked about that he's been frozen out of the Trump inner circle, at least as a formal position in the government. However, he was the former in the first term, like his top trade representative.
Okay.
Uh, but like I said, whether he is formally within the Trump cabinet or executive branch, whether that happens or not, he is an articulation of this concept of looking at trade surpluses and deficits, of looking at where are American jobs located overseas and how can we get them back. So that's where, by prefacing those first two faces, what I'm trying to say is that, like, in reality, just being more diplomatically neutral on, let's say, an issue in the Middle East, um, I don't think that actually has a lot of weight in preventing the American hostility. I think it has been happening. It is going to continue to happen. And even if Ireland just totally shuts its mouth with anything regarding foreign policy, that's not going to change anything. Maybe the level of rhetoric is maybe a little bit more charged because of it, but I don't find it that convincing that Ireland's
like when it came to the Middle East or foreign policy, I never really commented too much because my whole thing was to focus on what Ireland is doing. But since the embassy, the Israeli embassy has pulled out, I'm more like it just seems maybe yes we've taken a moral stance that is correct, but the fact that we've put a target on our backs in terms of Israel pulling out, like Israel is not generally kind to its adversaries, and just given that it has so much sway in America, and that's kind of my question is like in the US. Is there much support for Palestine amongst people that you talk about? Is there a, a disgruntlement against the government for how much they do support Israel, or is it irrelevant?
America is a different animal. America is a different culture, a different political system, and this issue has a lot of subtleties and complexities that maybe or we don't have time to get into. But I would say, like, yeah, in terms of the political establishment, like the bipartisan consensus is obviously Biden has done it, and Trump is saying he's going to continue to support what's been going on. And so, as far as our governing apparatus and our private sector elites, yeah, it's that's the consensus opinion. Although in the rest of the world, it's not attached to this, like, American um, uh, hegemonic center. They obviously have different opinions, and Ireland, I think, is a unique place where I've seen polls, over 70% of the population, support the sort of Palestinian cause in some manner of speaking. So, I mean, it is a very popular issue in Ireland. In some ways, I think the government is actually representing that view and actually, again, taking an interestingly moral stance on this stuff. And they're doing it alongside countries like Spain, for instance.
But the problem is
Yeah.
there's still an embassy in Spain. Like I morally, it can be the right stance, but the point is, you it depends how powerful you think Israel are and can be, and how much
Well,
soft influence and hard influence they can have. And when you realize that, big tech is just so aligned to them, like and it just I'm just very confused about the whole thing at the moment. As I say, I didn't pay much attention to it. It's not something I like to talk about too much, but just recently in the last 3 or 4 weeks, it just seems to have gone, 2 or 3 notches up.
well, just to put it a little bit in perspective economically, um, Israel represents about 0.7% of Irish exports. Now it makes up 3% of Irish imports. And most of that is the fact that you have Intel operations in Ireland, you have Intel operations in Israel, and the Israeli operations provide a lot of exports from Israel to Ireland vis-a-vis that conduit. And so one, in terms of the Irish economy, Israel is very small, and it is very tied up with like one specific sector in one specific company. If you would call, the 3% of imports like relatively higher than the 0.7. And so what I've said in this regard is I don't think that's from the spreadsheet point of view, it's not a very big number on either side. And when you look at the 3% and the Intel issue, I look at that and I say, whatever your opinion is, the Middle East is very risky. The risk premium on the Middle East is very high. So is it actually in Ireland's interest to decouple from Intel relying on those Israeli imports to de-risk Ireland from, if something happens with it, if a bomb goes off in an Intel operation in Israel, what does that do to the Irish economy and the Irish economy sector in semiconductors? So that's where my whole position has been. One, I think Ireland in general should expand their semiconductor sector natively. So I think you can expand the Irish operations to basically offset the imports Ireland gets from Israel. And so you could find those imports in other countries, and you would completely de-risk any Middle Eastern issue that would come up in the future. So I think that is a very clear point of where Ireland's moral stance on a diplomatic level actually kind of correlates to a very level-headed economic stance. And then number two, to whatever degree that risks some sort of domino effect in the US or things like that, again, this was already happening as I described by the first two phases. And then as I said, as I've written in other formats, I think if there's the risk of, in general, America leaving Ireland, I think the substitute can potentially be China. Ireland's the only country in Europe that has a trade surplus with China. China has come over to Ireland in the past to offer friendship and wanting to expand trade ties, namely agriculture, but also China's a big buyer of Irish semiconductor chips. And so I think there's a real opportunity to expand into the gigantic economic consumer market that is China. China currently represents 7% of Irish exports, and they make up it's 6.37% of Irish exports. Sorry about that. 6.37% of Irish imports, and then about 7% of Irish exports. So it's like that's already bigger than Israel, but China's such a much bigger country that Ireland can play into. And then that's not even getting into the rise of sort of the rest of Southeast Asia and how all those economies are coming up. So I see this issue, there's so much attention on it, when in reality, the value of it in terms of like the risk of losing economic value from it is so small, and that attention should be placed on increasing trade with countries like China or other places that are rising through Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, Malaysia, and like that, those represent bigger economic chunks.
So that's a good point. So this week there was a letter from Taoiseach Simon Harris in the Sunday paper saying that, announcing basically that they're going to completely flood Washington with, all our trade experts and just try and, bombard Washington with love in many ways, try and persuade them to keep investing in Ireland and keep relations strong, right?
Yeah.
In a way, should we actually be going to China and saying, well, as well, do that, but as well, and showing the US that, look, if you're going to pull out, if Apple's going to pull out, well, maybe Huawei are going to double, or, that's a bit simplistic. but in a way we have to protect ourselves as well, and that's a way of going on the offense. But what could we be doing to say to America, to say to the Trump administration that, we are actually here for business? It's hard to think that we're capable of putting forward a very good argument, given that just this week we've announced that there's going to be no new data centers until 2030. That we're pretty much closed for business for big tech in many ways. But what else could we be doing that America would be like, okay, no, these guys, we have to stick around?
Yeah. So there are bigger things at play than just the individuals on the ground. Like, of course, like, even though I might poke fun at it, for those that are confident in the idea that America is in Ireland because Ireland's an English language speaking country, it is highly educated, and so forth and so forth, that make Ireland attractive, excluding the very low tax rate and other shenanigans. Those things will, they're there. They make the argument for themselves. So that's going to be part and parcel of what this trade mission that Harris is referring to. And so again, it's sort of like you just have these long-standing macro forces at play, where the asset values of Ireland as an attractive place for U.S. investment and operations, like, are already there. There's nothing, you can't make Irish people speak English more. It's like those are already there, and you're not, the long-term desire for Americans to reduce presence in Ireland is also there. So it's like it's just a matter of like FaceTime and persuasion and things like that kind of. But I would say, when you do look at the individuals and you look at the unique individual that Trump is, like, you have to understand sometimes his psychology. And like, I shared a quote from you from his Art of the Deal, which is like, maybe Simon Harris should stop thinking about cocktail parties to invite Americans to a DC and just take time to read the Art of the Deal. Trump says in it, like, he does not respect people that have no leverage. If he smells you have no leverage, like, he will take advantage of you. And so this is kind of maybe a key way of understanding Trump, in that if Ireland thinks it can go with Simon Harris and say, like, can't you just be nice to us? That's not going to work. Like, Trump responds to kind of aggressive rebuttal back to him. So let me take like an example across Europe. Does anyone think that Viktor Orban in Hungary are in any way like outside Trump's favored, compatriots across the world? Like, Viktor Orban is well nestled in Trump orbit. Trump says great things about him. Hungary is an asset to Trump. Hungary has also the biggest footprint of Chinese investment in Europe. I have a quote right here. In 2002, Hungary alone captured 44% of all Chinese FDI into Europe. This was more than the big three, France, Germany, and the UK combined. So this is where we have like an interesting example where there is no way we're going to get to the flattery levels of Hungary vis-a-vis Trump. They are the first place finisher in that event. So that's not going to happen. But what's interesting with all that flattery that Hungary does, on a very realist level, they are bringing China into Europe, and they are playing China against the US, and are perhaps in certain ways able to use the leverage of China as a deal-making tool with America. And so that's where I would say, from just like a logical level, it makes sense for Ireland to want to expand trade ties with China.
Yeah.
But then from a negotiation level, it also makes sense that China provides the leverage which Ireland doesn't have. So I would just posit a question back to you, not like a gotcha or anything, but what do you view, absent China, is the leverage that Ireland has with America?
Over America?
Yeah.
I've been thinking about it for quite a while, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Like, I don't think anyone knows. And that's why your point of, Ireland making an attacking move of going to China is actually, I've read all the political commentators and nobody's talking that way yet. So, it seems obvious once you say it, but it's hard to envisage it. But it seems like a pretty tactically astute move. But why do you think we do have any direct leverage we can hold over America? We could definitely do things to, bring, that help our Irish diaspora in America and things like that and encourage people. But as leverage, I don't think that counts.
Yeah, and I think I've been playing that game a little bit, and sometimes the diaspora over here, while they have been very good in the past on certain issues for the older generation, um, and they might still be good on a few very very specific, not not publicized well issues. Yeah, to the degree to which they would really put up a fight over this is difficult to foresee. Um, I mean, you could make the argument that at the end of the day, the American pharma and tech world, want to retain the Irish tax scheme for them for their own, bottom lines. But again, like I said, those first two faces of American hostility to Ireland, um, there's not much they can do there. And to whatever degree that they desire operations in Ireland, if we actually do consider the advent of AI a destabilizing, diminishing force on employment, why would those companies actually need employees in Ireland? And I think as is common sense, and as I've analyzed and written about too in the past, uh, the truly high skilled main operations of these companies occur in Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
obviously, or their corporate HQ in America. The things that they're doing in other countries are in many cases things that would be prime targets of AI reductions.
Yeah. We
In
have we have the tech civil service here is what, a lot of people call it. It's the sales teams and things like that. And that's one of the risks that if they do onshore, their taxes, they may still have keep their offices here with large numbers of employees because they still need a base, for Europe or whatever. And that is actually a double-edged sword because now we're not going to get the billions in tax revenue, but we still have all these foreign employees, the foreign sales teams that are here. There's one for every country and to no real benefit. It's like, well, what's everyone doing here? You're just causing house prices to go up or rents to go up in Dublin, and you're not living here. You might not stay here. So it would nearly be better if they decided to onshore their taxes back to America, that they close down the offices altogether. Now, maybe I'm wrong there, but so it's not just in my view, it's not just as simple that they go or they stay. It's that, there's three options.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a very good point. And something to kind of just zoom out a bit here is that while you can't get away from kind of the short-term thinking of like, if they do this, there could be very drastic reductions in Irish tax revenue
Hmm.
and employment, and like how do you deal with that in the immediate impact of it? But this gets at, from a zoomed out level, the longer term problem, which is Ireland was on course to develop all of the internal self sustaining companies, sectors, and so forth that would make it have more resilience to these types of shocks. But instead, Ireland sacrificed that indigenous growth pattern
Hmm.
for one in about the early 2000s, which was more of this, let's just go totally into sort of being a tax loophole service and then some service-oriented jobs in the ICT sector.
Yeah.
So I think that when we talk about the short-term problems and we have to deal with them, like it is about time to get back to this fundamental problem of the path taken in the early 2000s to sacrifice the proper way to grow the economy and develop the economy has to be finally corrected and return to that path of saying Ireland will no longer be at risk of American companies leaving or being dependent on American companies because they will have their own globally competitive businesses that will employ their own people and that will export services and products across the world that will have shock resistance to any one country like America deciding unilaterally to change something, whether it's for economics or for very reactionary foreign policy concerns.
Yeah. Well, give us, who is the best country of similar size to Ireland in the world that has done that?
What aspect are you speaking to?
Independence, growing indigenous tech ecosystems,
Yep.
the whole pie, really.
Well, yeah. I would say this gets kind of into my academic analysis of just how countries grow and develop in general. And so, from my perspective, I look at it and say there's sort of a standard model of how countries develop, and it always starts along the lines of moving from agricultural and raw commodity exporting into industrial sectors, and then build on that into these sort of more modern service economy sectors. And you do that by building on top. And what Ireland has tried to do is think they can sort of, like, it's like a pyramid that you build on. And Ireland has kind of thought, well, we can just grab the top little triangle of the pyramid of services, and we can make hay with that. And so that's where that's the fundamental disagreement of no, you need that building on top of one another that supports an economy like that. And so you can, and I have written about it. I can show you some articles, but I can point to countries like, I think Japan is a great model because whatever anyone says about some niche statistic that they could look at, or some cultural pearl clutching about work hours or that aren't existent over there or not. I think everyone looks at Japan and says it's one of the most advanced countries in the world. It has some of the best infrastructure in the world. It has no one will look at it and say it doesn't have a service economy. It's like all these low-wage factory jobs. But at the same time, it has tons of industrial exporting that goes on in it. And so Japan's just a fun example that is interesting to read through, that shows that development trajectory of building on top of one another. You only get the service economy by having the industrial economy, and you don't have to get rid of one for the other. And so much of that thinking is actually because of the distraction of America a lot of the time, because what America has done, it has used those arguments to basically sell out its own people, to then allow those manufacturing jobs to leave America, go to other countries for lower wages and so forth, and that the elites of America collect a higher share of the profits because they're not sharing it with their native laborers. So, like, that ideology is part and parcel to fueling the past 50 years of American policy on this issue. And as I've said before, this is part of the reason why for the past decade, we've had a resurgence of populism. And one of the core ideas being we need to bring factories back to America. So I would just say this is kind of the standard model of how countries grow. The people that were advising Ireland in the 80s to jumpstart the Celtic Tiger, this was their theory. I've referenced Eric S. Reinhardt, who was one of the advisors back then to Ireland. This is his theory. He has a great book, Why Some Countries Grow Rich, Others Grow Poor. It's a fascinating read. I recommend it. It's definitely digestible. And And so that is the standard model. And you can look at other countries that do that. And America is a very unique place that is you can model off of, but in many ways you can't model off of because of this sort of exception to the rule in this current time period. So yeah, so I would say I view South Korea as well as an example that
Yeah,
has done this.
I think there's some that get, South Korea, Singapore, Japan. A lot of people talk about Denmark. Israel even gets knocked about. There is examples that we can go off, and a lot of people are like, we got to do that. So, but like, if worst case scenario, we're doing this call next year, Apple have announced they're going to pay their taxes in the US. Like what's that next year like in Ireland? Like do house prices fall? Is there panic? Is it as bad as 2008? Can we get a Chinese replacement in quickly?
Yeah, that's the hard part of statecraft and how this stuff will shake out. So I mean, I think the Irish government's knee-jerk reaction would probably be something to the degree of austerity that like we have to tighten the belt. And so, someone loses their job, someone stops getting some sort of subsidy or welfare payment they were getting. So that would seem to me to be the direct action the government would take. But again, it's like, to what degree does the Irish government, as it stands today, have the ability and have the foresight to actually craft effective policy to this? Now, I always also say, like, life is always more boring than we'd like it to be sometimes. So maybe these drastic impacts won't all come at once. And there's ways to kind of slowly mitigate these. But yeah, I don't see a real policy foresightedness that has anything different than just this same old talking point that, well, Ireland's English language speaking and we educate a lot of our youth and which don't get employed in the sector that they're alleged to be educated for. That's a different subject. So I don't see anyone making a case around that. And even some of the people that are sort of more of the novel voices coming up in the Irish discourse, I don't think they have that much of a distinction in what they're saying outside of, marginality of kind of going around the edges and tinkering with stuff. Where you really need, like, you need these like big policy ideas, like shift to China, pivot to China, expand industry, things like that.
One of the things you asked, like, what could we hold as leverage? I don't know about leverage, but another thing that could entice people in is starting to entertain the idea of nuclear. Now, there's you talk about a lot, but there's lots of debate whether Ireland can facilitate nuclear, but let's just say we can.
Yeah.
There's one law at the moment that prohibits nuclear energy in Ireland. It's a 1998 Electrical Services Act or something, Section 18 of it. And all they have to do, if you want to get the attention of any tech company, mega tech company, you need to repeal this law straight away. Like if you just, and that's not saying that you're going to build it. All it's saying is that nuclear is no longer illegal. Okay, just cross out those two lines, two sentences from Irish statute, and the boardrooms across the world of mega tech companies are like, okay, that's now an English-speaking country in Europe that is now saying it might be open to nuclear. Let's put some lobby groups in there and let's get the conversation going. That's something I'd do straight away because at the moment, you know as well, Meta, Microsoft, Apple, they're all investing in nuclear because AI is going to need abundant energy. And if you want to electrify the fleet, everything, if you want to address climate change, it's all got to be nuclear. The answer to everything is nuclear in so many ways. And so that would be a serious policy shift for Ireland, but I just don't think current government can even spell nuclear.
Yeah. So I'm in total agreement with you. I like nuclear. Um, I think it's just like the only thing I would say is just like having realistic expectations of the timelines of it, which I do think can move quickly, but
But to build a nuclear
yeah.
reactor like takes 15 to 20 years, and that's by law.
Yeah,
You
and then you
can't.
got to factor in all of the hemming and hawing of getting through like Irish discourse, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
look, we can barely build a cycle lane, down the road from me. Like honestly, the cycle lane's been going on for 3 or 4 years, but never mind nuclear. But that's my point is like all you have to do is pass one statute and it's no longer illegal. Okay? And that just gets the ball rolling. This is going to be 15, 20 years, no matter what. But like, why not start? The best time
Yeah.
to plant a tree was 15 years ago. The next time is now. Um, and this is a very important tree because we're going to lose out. The countries that are going to go nuclear first are going to be the winners. And like the way I like to think of AI company or big tech, mega tech companies at the moment is that they actually want to own. They talk about the stack. They actually want to vertically integrate the whole like life. They want to own the energy, they want to own the hardware, the software, and now they want to own government. They have their hand on the tail in government. So it's like they are the emperors, and if you can appease the emperor by having abundant energy on your island off of Europe, you're going to do pretty well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have to deal with the reality of the situation for sure. But that's where, and again, maybe that's a losing battle because you're fighting the emperor and the empire. But I think there's something practically beneficial and morally beneficial about putting those people in their place if they want to sort of take the reins of power in certain plutocratic ways and kind of dictate down what the rest of us have to do. And again, in many ways, the past 30 years, 50 years of American Western society has been very much the plutocrats of the world or of the West dictating to their general populations what must be.
Yeah,
And
look at Trump.
yeah,
Look at Elon. Let's. It's happening. People don't seem too pissed off about it. Some people hate him. I don't hate him too much. He does have a lot of power, but like if the government is serious about keeping big tech here, that's what you would do. But if you're
yeah. I
not
mean, you're
serious,
it's nuclear is a great policy in that regard. Nuclear is a great policy in general, I think. So I think we're totally aligned on that issue.
yeah, but they won't do it. And it's part of what I say. Like we have a political crisis in that our best case scenario at the moment is a letter or an article from the Taoiseach in the Sunday paper saying we're going to send more people to Washington to have a chat. Like that's all we got. Um, so I look across at what's going on in Europe at the moment, and maybe that gives us a bit more confidence. There's political change coming in Europe. The AfD in Germany, Marine Le Pen in France, Reform. Nigel Farage looks to be making great ground in Europe, in the UK. And I'm not saying I agree with all these people, but at least they're all willing to make bigger decisions and change things. And I just think that that's what's going to be needed. Um, but I just at the same level of a similar movement does not exist in Ireland, and it just feels sometimes that Ireland is just so dependent on what mainland Europe does and what the US does, and we kind of just wait for them to make a decision and we go along with it. But they're going to make decisions without Ireland's interest.
Yeah, yeah, and so that's the thing, and the challenge that Ireland faces. Though the reason that I have great interest in Ireland and I'm so invested in it is that I think there is a distinct Irish culture, and there is a trajectory of history to it that makes the Irish a very interesting people with that can rise to the occasion, that can not just be a follower. And I think this trend of being a follower to Europe or being a follower to America is actually a blip in what is Irish history. And like you can return very easily to a lot more of that independent streak. So how this happens after an election where the kind of the status quo is preserved for the next 5 years, that's a hard question to answer. But I think as long as people like you keep raising your voice, if whatever value I provide in writing an article here and there and getting to chat with folks, I think adds to that pivot coming. And maybe even if there's people that are part of the status quo that hear that and see the writing on the wall, that they themselves can hopefully make some changes. And then by the time 5 years rolls around, we have a much more muscular, professional, formal, populist movement in Ireland that is emulating the trends that you see across Europe that could actually get into office and make those big policy ideas.
Yeah, well, we're going to keep at it, and every article, every post, we need more content and just getting it out there. And it's something I'm learning just from looking at what's happening in the UK. There's so many different magazines or podcasts, and everyone's just saying that it takes repetition to really just get the message out there because most people aren't paying attention. They're doing their best, but once a seismic shock comes along, people will start dialing in pretty quickly, and you got to be there, ready to present to them when they come looking for answers. But
Yeah.
so look, this has been great. I know we keep in touch, but this is the 30th of December. One prediction for 2025, or thing we should be looking out for, or resolution.
Yeah, I'll do a crowd pleaser slash very general one. The Irish will rise to the occasion. I don't know what that will look like, but I will put my chips on that, and I think I will be vindicated.
Yeah, well, I hope so too.
Yeah.
So look, Peter, brilliant. Happy New Year to you. I hope you enjoy the new year, and we'll be talking in 2025 for sure.
Okay. Thanks for having me on.
See you. Bye bye.